Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be doing the full review and everything really on the Gigabyte Z77X-UP7, which is their top of the range stroke flagship, whatever you want to call it, Z77 board. Now we've done a preview on this already where we looked all at the box and all at the aesthetics of the board and, you know, covered most of the main features already, which I'll put an annotation up for and a link, so click that video if you want to go and have a look what's in the box and have a really good look around the board itself. This video today is really kind of like a backup video for the main review which Brian's going to be doing. I've had been graced with his presence for most of this week, where he and I have been working on this together. It's been really nice to spend some time with him actually, but Brian's going to be doing the main review on this, which is going to be on Overclock 3D, which I will put underneath. And I'm really just going to be going over what we've kind of discovered and our thoughts on this board throughout this week. And there's a fair bit to cover. Now, if you want to see it compared with other boards and stuff like that in graphs, then obviously go and click the review underneath. I'd go there anyway because Brian's always got some really nice insights on, you know, his thoughts and stuff, but it's always really nice to see the results in the graphs. And I've never really found that graphs work as part of videos. I think it should be more about us chatting. Now anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you in and give you a look at the test rig, and this is the test rig that we've used all week. And then we'll break off and I will give you a good chat about the board, because that's the best way I can cover this. I don't really see the point in us trying to put all the results up like we would with a graphics card, when I can get this covered really by talking you all through it. So if you're honestly interested in buying this board and you want to get to know about it and you want to know what it's capable of and all that type of stuff, then stick with me. This one will be worth it. But for now, like I said, I'm going to bring the camera in, give you a look at the test rig and talk you through what we've used. Right then peeps, so taking a look at the test rig, obviously we've got everything hanging off of the UP7. We've got a HIS 7970, it's just the original reference design card. This is the one that I use in all of my board reviews and everything, so that's, you know, nothing different there. We've got some Corsair Dominator Platinum memory. This is actually 2666 memory. We did the stock tests, as you'll see in the review, at 2133, and then we did the overclock tests at 2400. We didn't go to 26 because we're going to save that for when we do the actual review on these sticks, and obviously it would have ended up being all the same tests. But anyway, power supply is an AX 1200 watt. The solid state drive is a Neutron GTX 240GB, obviously Corsair. Then we've got the H100 at the top doing the cooling. And that, my dear people, is pretty much it. So that's the test rig today. As you can see, it is quite nice. While we've got the board out and everything like this, there's a chipset just there, and that's a PLX chipset. That's to add extra PCI Express 3 lanes in, because obviously we do have the 4 cards. If you run a pair of cards in the 16 slots, they do run at 8 times each. But then you can keep adding cards in, and you can run 4 should you wish, and I'm pretty sure then they all run at 8. But obviously that's PCI Express 3 lanes, not PCI Express 2 lanes. Something I do really like about the board, if I zoom you in, press the right button, Thomas. If you have a look at the fins there on the heatsink, that really does, it's kind of like a new and old mix is the best way that I can explain it, because the top with the solid plate, it looks like all a part of the new heatsinks, but then underneath, with those fine fins, it does really look a lot like some of the older heatsinks, like even back to the 775 days. Now if we come down here, I'm just going to move the camera, you can see it even more there with the, what I would call the Southbridge heatsink. Because I'm still very much Northbridge, Southbridge, even though the Northbridge is now part of the CPU. But anyway, you can see what I mean by the mixture there of like the new kind of cast type heatsink top there, but then the old school type of fins. Now, those black fins, like with the older heatsinks, would normally have been like copper or something. But the mix of the two with the black, I really, really like. I'm a big fan of that. to be fair, and it's definitely some, you know, a big plus point about this board. Now if I zoom you all back out and then we'll move the camera again, we'll go back. Like I said, go and take a look at the video that I've already done when we go around all the features, but you can see the buttons here, the top two buttons there as we look at it, they're for the multiplier. Those two buttons there are for the base clock, and you've got a gear button, so you can actually change whether it's like a third of a 0.1 of a base clock, a third of a base clock, or a whole kind of base clock, so jumping up one completely. And that gear button can be pretty handy. Obviously a power button. That's a CMOS switch, and we do have a reset switch down here. There are fan headers pretty much everywhere, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. And it has got an M-SATA slot here, and it's quite a nice place to have it, because some of the M-SATA slots, I've seen them in kind of silly places, really is the best way I can put it. But we've got one here. Obviously the M-SATA cards aren't that big, but you can get them in quite large capacities now. So whether you decide to use that as cache for a mechanical hard drive, or you end up getting quite a big one and just using it as your normal storage, that is obviously completely up to you, and you do have the option there. The only thing is, if you do use the M-SATA slot, it means that the SATA 2 port 5 will be disabled. So it does mean that it's not a SATA 3 M-SATA thing there. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So it really depends what type of speed that you're looking for. If you're looking for something rapid, then I'd probably say get yourself like a normal SATA 3 solid state drive. But if you're not really that fussed, you can obviously use this. And also, if you end up using an M-SATA, getting a 120, and I think there are 240s available now, they can get quite expensive, but it does mean that you're not necessarily going to have lots of SATA cables hanging out, which when you get really anal about things like me, that can mean less cabling. So it can, you know, be pretty good in the long run. So that's pretty much the rig as we've tested it. Like I said, if you want to know anything else about the board, check the other video, because we do go over everything. But it's now time for us to break off and start talking about the performance, and then our kind of feelings about the board, and then get it all wrapped up. It'll all be kind of like a big kind of like performance type of testing type conclusion type thing. But really, I need to shush my mouth and we'll move on and get that sorted. Right then peeps, so as this is going to be like an extended conclusion where we'll do all of our kind of wrapping up and chatting about what's happened in the main review, we'll talk about the award now. We are going to give it the Gold Award, and I will kind of explain why. And I'll start from the very beginning, so get yourself comfy, maybe go and get yourself a cup of tea and a biscuit, and I will go through everything for you. So, Gold Award. Now, we've looked online, and it looks like online it's going to be coming in around the £300 to £320 mark, depending on which e-tailer that you go to. We found one that was 306, found one that's 319. And that's at the moment. There's not necessarily a massive amount of these about at the moment. I know that there's only a couple of these in the UK for reviews at this present moment in time, and this is the only one that's actually been sent out. So it's still quite a new product. Expect more e-tailers to pick it up soon. We tested with a 3770K. Now, when Brian came down, he was meant to have brought his CPU with him, because the early kind of engineering samples of the Ivy bridges that went out were much better with temperatures than the retail ones that went out later. We all know about the thermal interface kind of fast and stuff, but the engineerings, they were a bit cooler, so I don't know whether they had different thermal compounds. We think they might have been cherry picked, because they do seem to overclock a little bit better as well. So essentially, Brian forgot to bring his with him, so we've had to use a retail sample that I have here. Now, when I tested this retail sample on a different board, we only managed to get 4.6 out of it, and that was around 1.4 volts anyway. And I was a little bit worried when Brian first said, to the point that we almost we were thinking about asking his wife to special delivery us the engineering sample, so that we can make sure that we did the review properly. But we thought we'll persevere with it. We'll do the overclock, and we'll see how we get on with it on this. and then we will kind of like, you know, work out whether we really need to be getting the engineering sample sent down to kind of make it fair with the other boards. Because obviously you can't just have, you always need to try and keep the hardware consistent. So if you've got a CPU that will do 4.8 gigahertz without a sweat, but then you've only got another one that can only just about get to 4.6, and you use those at different times on different boards, obviously the result is going to be different. So you do need to try and keep it consistent. So retail sample, I'd only been able to get 4.6 out of it before on another board. I really didn't have much hope for it on this board, and I was getting a bit worried. I didn't really need to worry though, because the board is actually really good and quite easy to work with. In that, I managed to get a 5 gigahertz screenshot. We were running just over, well, it was about 1.45 volts. Kind of the warm end for an Ivy bridge. We wouldn't normally say kind of go over about the 1.4 mark with these. A lot of them don't really need to go over 1.4 either for a 24/7 stable clock. With the retail samples, you will get heat problems when you get up to that kind of temperature as well. Even an amazing air cooler, water cooler, everything, the temperatures will soar because the thermal compound in them just isn't that great. You kind of get to a level where it's all kind of normal, and then you just get to a point where it can't cope anymore and the temperatures just rocket. This was something we did cover in the main review previously, and that's for the Ivy bridge stuff. So with this, we did manage to get a 5 gigahertz screenshot. Now with the other boards that we've done, that's kind of on par with the Maximus 5 Extreme, but it didn't really take a lot of work to get that 5 gig screenshot. Normally we kind of with Brian's CPU, a really good board will bench at 4.8. I could get 4.8 at below 1.4 volts, 100% stable, not a problem. I managed to tweak it up eventually, and we played a little bit with the base clock, which I don't do. I really do not suggest people with the Ivy bridge to play with the base clock. We did it just to, you know, just to try and get that tail, you know, that upper clock up. Problem is when you change the base clock, it affects the memory, and you should not, or at least in my opinion, you should not overclock your base clock on these, because it will make them unstable. 103 will be the absolute top end for an amazing chip, really, and it's really not worth it. Anyone that kind of says to you, overclock your base clock to overclock your memory, really isn't the way to do it. With the way with the Ivy bridge you should do it is with the multiplier steps. So 1600, 1866, 2133, 2400, 2666, those steps. You will not get any performance increase out of just that kind of little extra bit of base clock, and 9 times out of 10 it will make things unstable and it messes around with everything else. So I would advise you to stay on the 100 base clock and just go up with the multipliers. It'll make things much easier with your memory, you'll be able to run your voltages much lower, and long term your system will stay stable as well. Ivy bridge really isn't designed to have that base clock played with. We did it on this just for the sake of, you know, just showing it as a part of the review, because at the end of the day this is really kind of a high-end overclocking board. We couldn't quite get it from 49 multiplier to 50 and it be bench stable, so we went back to 49, and then we notched the base clock up a couple of notches. Ended up at 101.5. Literally 1.5 overclock. Now this CPU will do about 103 anyway, but with the multiplier up so high, it just wouldn't go that little bit further and remain stable. It made next to no difference on the memory, and it made next to no difference on the performance results from being at 4.9 gigahertz anyway. It literally was just to see the numbers change on CPU-Z. That was it. So this is one of the things that will be saying to you: leave it at 100, leave your memory, and also a little bit of advice with Ivy bridge memory as well. With Ivy bridge memory, where I say to you, stick with the kind of the steps. A lot of the time, it's your best idea to buy the memory you actually want the speed to run at. So if you want 1600, buy 1600. Accept that it's going to be 1600. If you manage to get 1866 out of it, think of that as a bonus, but don't be disappointed. The biggest step is going from 1866 to 2133. If you buy 1866, I very, very much doubt most kits will actually go up to that 2133 mark, and then also from 2133 to 2400. So pretty much buy what you want. Don't factor in memory overclocking as a part of your overclock experience unless you're just playing around. It's definitely not something I would kind of really mess about with. Now, I love overclocking, but when the way they changed everything with Ivy or 1155 as a whole, it kind of took the fun out of everything. Because I was very much I liked playing with the base clock on 1366 and 1156, and it did change things. Really, because this is a mainstream product, essentially what they've done is make it much simpler for everyone, because you've just got those steps. You don't really have to worry about the memory steps too much. You pretty much just play with a multiplier, and that's the way you should keep it. So if you want 1600, buy 1600 and so forth, 1866, 2133, 2400. If you want to overclock your memory, just go that step. Leave the base clock alone, go up that little extra step. If you can get it, you're on to a winner. If you can't, don't be disappointed, because you got what you paid for originally. Another thing is with Ivy Bridge, it is about the speed and not the timing so much. Timings will make a slight difference with some benchmarks, but Ivy Bridge or 1155 as a whole is a bandwidth horse, so they like that speed. Games don't necessarily kind of benefit from it very much. The difference between 1866 and 2133 is minimal. It really comes down to when you're doing photo editing and video rendering and stuff. That's the time when things will really start, really intensive stuff. But if it is just for gaming, just get yourself 8 GB of 1600 memory and you'll be perfectly fine. But we've gone massively off topic, but it is kind of all in and around the overclock experience of this board anyway, and 1155 as a whole. But so we managed to get it running at about just over 4.9, sorry, nearly 5 gigahertz. But like I said, to be fair, I would have just left it on 100 base clock if it was me talking to you and advising you what to do. We just did it, just to see what we could do for the review, and so that you kind of knew, and you can just tick it off, and you don't really need to worry. Now, something to pick up with the BIOS. It is just like a normal kind of Gigabyte 3D BIOS or the normal Gigabyte BIOS that you'd see everywhere else. There's nothing in there that you won't see on one of the lower end boards. It's not any more in depth or anything. So everyone will know their way around it. If you've used Z77 before, or if you used a Gigabyte BIOS before, you'll know where everything is. The 3D power is pretty, there's a fair bit in there, as there are with the other boards. But even with when I was running the 4.9, nearly 5 gigahertz overclock, I really didn't need to mess around with it too much. The only thing that you should be looking at is the load line calibration. Now, the load line calibration is a bit of a funny one. It works better than the other Gigabyte boards that we've used previously with the load line calibration. But just put it to extreme. If you're going to be pushing your CPU beyond kind of 4.2 or 4.4, whether it's a 3570K or a 3770K, whatever you end up using with this, just put it to extreme. And I will explain why. Because the Gigabyte boards, they still do have a bit of a V-droop problem. Whereas the load line calibration doesn't really do anything up till you get it to extreme. Now, when you get it to extreme, it will keep your CPU voltage pretty much exactly where it's set to in BIOS, no matter whether you're in BIOS or whether you're in Windows, open CPU-Z. When I had this set to 1.4 volts in Windows, it was 1.404 volts. If I turned it down one notch away from extreme, it would be 1.38 from 4. If I turned it off altogether, it was 1.35. So the only thing I can say is, without that load line calibration turned on, it isn't brilliant. It's beyond not brilliant. But all I would do is just go to extreme and turn it on extreme. And the only thing I would say as a negative point for this is Gigabyte really need to have the load line calibration changed so it's off and on, because the other settings that they've got in there are not needed at all, because they don't really do anything. So that would be how I would say to you when you go to the BIOS: off or extreme, off and on. That's it. At least extreme on this does, sort the V droop out on it off. And bearing in mind, we were using this, like I said, with quite high volts and really high loading as well, because we were running OCCT runs, doing all the benchmark runs, Cinebench, POV, doing OCCT stress testing. We did the lot. And like I said, if it was at 1.4, it would say 1.404. If we had it at 1.45, it was 1.405 volts. It's, sorry, 1.4505 volts. So it just goes a little smidge over, but it doesn't really fluctuate at all, which is brilliant. That means it's working. It's just the other settings, they didn't, you know, really do much. So it's at that point when, like I said, hopefully I've explained to you. Now it can do 4 graphics cards. This is going to be kind of on the kind of verge of, you know, high-end benches though, when they're just searching for numbers. I don't see many people buying this board and then running 4 graphics cards. 2 graphics cards, that would probably be the limit for, you know, most people. And the layout for 2 graphics cards is perfect, because you've got 4 slots, the orange ones. First one 16 times, the second orange slot is an 8 times, third slot is 16 again, and then the last one is 8. So if you're going to be running 2 cards, you're going to have 2 decent slots between the first and the second graphics card, so you'll have plenty of room for it to be able to breathe. It's actually, in that respect, for dual graphics, laid out really, really well, especially if you're going to be running air. So that, like I said, they will be able to breathe. It's perfect. If you do run 2 graphics cards, they do run at 8 times, if I'm reading the Gigabyte web page correctly, because the way that they've got the PCI Express breakdown laid out is very confusing. Even I looked at it and it was just like, if this one's running, this one runs at that. If that one's connected, then this one runs at that. At no point did it say 1 card this, 2 cards that, 3 cards that. Yeah, it was all a bit confusing. But we'll say worst case scenario, they'll both be running at 8 times. It might be 16. I just can't understand their website very well. But anyway, 2 graphics cards, absolutely perfect. You're not going to have any problems with spacing or anything there. There are obviously lots of connections on the back for extra like graphics if you want to run onboard graphics. But for a high-end board like this, I find that a little bit confusing. Now, something I will say is the colouring on this goes back really to the X58 overclock. And with the X58 overclock, it was a very stripped down 1366 board, literally built for overclocking, which is why when I first saw this is what I thought this was. This is kind of more aimed at like a high-end kind of gaming machine, borderline kind of overclocking machine. It's not such a properly stripped out overclock only board. This is much more friendly for you know, gamers and stuff, and you can tell that when you look at the back. Because as you've seen in the other video, there's 2 Ethernet ports on the back. Now, most people don't need 2 anyway, much less someone that's just going to be overclocking. They don't need, you know, one to go off to like they're flipping for the internet, and then maybe connect another one to a NAS drive or another bit of their network. It would really be pointless. I have to admit, I've been, you know, working with computers for years. Very, very few occasions have I ever actually needed to run 2 Ethernets, but the option's there should people need it. There's obviously the onboard audio and stuff like that as well. It's nothing massively special on this, not like with some of the other boards, but it's there. It will get you by. If you've not got, you know, really expensive speakers or anything like that, you're probably not going to notice any difference. Me personally, I would still, even if it was the most amazing onboard audio, I would still be running a dedicated card. But the overall feelings of this board really is the overclocking. Kind of, it set me back a bit because I really wasn't expecting the retail CPU that I had already had before and had, you know, trouble getting it to 4.6 with another board. Really didn't have, you know, really didn't think it'd go this far. It did kind of sit me back on my bum a little bit and kind of like, wow, this is actually really, really good. The only issue, like I said, that I have with it was that load line calibration, but when you set it to extreme, it does work. So it's just the fact Gigabyte just need to remove all the other settings and have it on or off. That's the best way I can go with that. But the fact that something we do need to say right near the end of the video is that where we have used a retail CPU, not cherry picked, just ripped out of a box, random job, do you know what I mean? So it's the type of CPU that any one of you could get. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a silicon lottery win at all. I'd say this is probably, you know, kind of run-of-the-mill CPU, kind of a nice average. And if you don't know what I mean by the silicon lottery, is just because it's a 3770K doesn't mean that every single one of them will perform the same. So this is kind of what I would say is an average CPU, and we still managed to get it up to 4.9, nearly 5 gigahertz for, you know, to be able to be run. I would say that if you want if you've got a decent 3770K, this board will get the absolute most out of it for you. And when you look at the benchmarks results in the main review, you can also see that it's absolutely on the money with all the other expensive boards that are out there. Because there really isn't, you either get a board that will overclock well and perform well at the same time, or they just don't. Z77 is pretty much one or the other, and there's really not much between them. So if you like the orange colouring, then it's an amazing performing board. If you don't necessarily like the orange, then you're just going to end up buying a different brand, aren't you? But it does make a nice change for me to be able to say Gigabyte have made an amazing board. And it, like I said, it can be quite difficult to be able to eke out everything that you possibly can for Z77, 1155, however you want to put it, Ivy Bridge. One thing I will say is the £300 price tag, it does kind of sound expensive, but the CPU socket area alone, just the power area around that CPU socket and the CPU socket section of the board, costs the same price as the whole of the D3H or whatever it's called, the Z77 D3H board, does to build the whole thing. There's that much crammed into that CPU area of all that power, making sure it's all perfect. That one little bit costs the same price as one of their lower end boards to make the whole board. Now, when you consider that we're not factoring in the Z77 chipset in with that, the PLX chipset, or anything else, because the Intel chipsets aren't cheap at all, you can kind of, it's easy then to understand why the whole board does cost that much. So, just to recap, it's an amazing board. It will literally get everything out of the CPU that you buy, no matter whether you win the silicon lottery or not. The board will be able to cope with it. It'll probably do more for you than you'll ever really be able to understand. 3D BIOS, just switch the load line calibration to extreme. Make sure you set your memory timings up, memory voltages. You don't really need to mess about with it too much beyond that. Always make sure you manually set your CPU voltages as well. I still see people saying to me, oh, my CPU's running at stock. I've left it on auto, but I'm overclocking. Auto means it can auto set your voltage. It doesn't stay at stock. You have to manually set your volts, because all BIOSes will push your voltages up to make it stable. And 9 times out of 10, they do that by putting too much voltage through. So what you need to do is have a look. Say for argument's sake, you do get a 4.4 gigahertz overclock with it on its auto setting, and do you know what I mean? You've gone up to 44 multiplier, everything's on auto. Go and have a look, see what CPU Z says. Say for argument's sake, it's 1.4 volts. Let's say it's that, and that's on auto. Then what you need to do is go into BIOS, take it out of auto, put it on 1.4 volts, but then back it off. So you go down to 1.375 volts, for example. Go into Windows, test to see if it's stable. If it is, go back into BIOS, move it down another couple of notches. Go back into Windows, test to see if it's stable. You get to the point where it's not stable and you put the voltage up a notch again. So you can get something that is stable, but it'll be much lower than your auto overclock. And the thing to remember is, guys and girls, is that most of the heat created will be because of the voltage. I don't care if you come to me and say I've got 66 degrees at 4.4 gigahertz. Means nothing to me. What's your voltage? Voltage is where the heat comes from. So if you manage to bring your voltage down, your temps will come down as well, even if it stays at the same like gigahertz overclock speed, whatever you want to call it. So that's something to remember. It's just like a like a general kind of rule for you as well. So anyone out there now that is running their CPU voltage on auto, I can guarantee you will be able to have a look at CPU Z and you'll be able to turn it down a bit. Something else that's worth noting as well is that if you run any CPU at stock and it's at auto, you can still turn it down. I've had CPUs before running at 1 volt. And they were like 950s and 970s and stuff like that. You really can bring them right down and the temperatures plummet. And I do mean plummet. So there's something for you all to do. This video is going to be going live on Friday. There's something for you to do at the weekend. Watch this video, take a few notes about what I've said, go and play with your board and see if you can get your volts down. If you do manage to do it, jump onto the Overclock 3D forums and tell me about it, because I do try and read stuff there. Well, do try and read everything is what I should say, because I'm on there daily. But I obviously can't read every thread because it's quite busy. But, gold award winning, watch the fan start. Ding! Gold award winning Gigabyte Z77X-UP7. Been an absolute pleasure to work with it. It's been an even bigger pleasure to work with Brian on this review as well. We really do need to start doing it more often. But for now at least, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. This is the first review. If this is the first review that you've seen of mine and you've got to the end without skipping, then congratulations, you're going to like the other reviews because there's loads of them and they're longer than this as well. Comment as well. Always like to hear feedback, whether it's good or bad. But beware, some of the natives, if you get a little bit arsey with me about stuff, there's plenty of the regulars which will chime in, and yeah, there's been quite a few wars recently. But anyway, we'll skip past that. This is Tiny Tom Logan with a gold award winning Gigabyte Z77X-UP7 with another video for you out. Ding! I do love doing that ding. Ding! Remote.